The candlelight flickered across the chamber as the Duke of Devonshire reached for the delicate ribbon at her shoulder. Eleanor Beaumont had waited her entire life for this moment, her wedding night. Yet as the silk gown slipped from her skin, she felt her breath catch. His hands stilled, the warmth drained from his face. In the golden light, the silvered scars that traced across her back and shoulders were laid bare, each one a testament to a past she had buried beneath layers of propriety and silk. The Duke stepped back, his eyes wide with something Eleanor could not name. Was it horror, pity, disgust? Her heart shattered as she realized that even in marriage, even with the man she had chosen to trust with her future, her deepest secret might cost her everything. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Eleanor Beaumont had been raised in the knowledge that her beauty was her greatest asset, and her obedience her most valuable trait. The Beaumont family, though noble in name and considerable in fortune, had always understood that true power in Regency England lay not in what one possessed, but in whom one married. From the moment Eleanor had turned 17, her mother had orchestrated her life with the precision of a military campaign. Every ball, every garden party, every carefully chaperoned walk through Hyde Park was a strategic maneuver designed to secure an advantageous match. The Beaumont estate in Hertfordshire was a sprawling testament to generations of careful stewardship and fortunate marriages. The house itself, built during the reign of Queen Anne, stood amid manicured gardens and ancient oaks, its stone facade mellowed to a warm honey color that glowed in the afternoon sun. Eleanor had grown up within its walls, learning to embroider, to play the pianoforte with adequate skill, to speak French with a pleasing accent, and above all, to hold her tongue and lower her eyes in the presence of gentlemen. Yet beneath the carefully constructed exterior of the perfect young lady, Eleanor harbored dreams that would have horrified her mother. She read voraciously, devouring not just the approved novels, but her father's collection of philosophy and history. She sketched in secret, filling pages with observations of the world around her that were far too keen, far too unladylike, and she wondered, in the quiet hours before dawn, whether marriage truly had to mean the end of all curiosity, all intellectual pursuit, all independence. Her mother, Lady Margaret Beaumont, had other plans. When Sir Percival Thornbridge had shown interest in Eleanor during the London season, Lady Margaret had seized the opportunity with both hands. The Thornbridge family was ancient, powerful, and exceptionally wealthy. Sir Percival himself was the heir to vast estates in Yorkshire and a considerable fortune. That he was also arrogant, dismissive of anyone he considered beneath him, and possessed of a temper that occasionally showed itself in cutting remarks, seemed to Lady Margaret entirely beside the point. Eleanor had tried to voice her reservations. She had attempted to explain to her mother that Sir Percival made her uncomfortable, that his eyes held a coldness that belied his practiced smiles, that when he held her hand during a dance, his grip was just a fraction too tight. But Lady Margaret would hear none of it. "You're being foolish, Eleanor," her mother had said, her voice sharp with irritation. "Sir Percival is everything a young woman could hope for. He is handsome, wealthy, and from one of the finest families in England. What more could you possibly want? Love," Eleanor had thought but did not say, respect, kindness, a partnership rather than ownership. But these were not words that Lady Margaret would understand, and so Eleanor had remained silent as she had been taught. The engagement had been announced at a grand ball at the Thornbridge London residence. Eleanor had stood beside Sir Percival, a fixed smile on her face as congratulations poured in from all sides. She had felt his hand at the small of her back, possessive and firm, and had suppressed a shiver. This was her future then. This was the golden cage into which she would be locked, and the door would be sealed on her wedding day. Sir Percival had been attentive during their courtship, in the manner of a man who had acquired a valuable possession and wished to ensure it remained in pristine condition. He brought her flowers, though never asked what kind she preferred. He escorted her to concerts, though never inquired about her taste in music. He spoke to her of his estates, his horses, his position in society, but never once asked about her thoughts, her opinions, her dreams. There were moments when Eleanor caught glimpses of the man beneath the polished exterior, and those moments filled her with dread. Once, at a garden party, she had seen him strike his riding crop against the leg of a servant who had been too slow in bringing refreshments. The blow had been delivered with casual cruelty, as though the servant were no more than an inconvenient animal. Another time she had overheard him speaking with his friends about the upcoming marriage, referring to her as a pretty enough trinket, and laughing at his companion's crude jest about the wedding night. Eleanor had told herself that she was being oversensitive, that all marriages required compromise, that her duty was clear. But in her heart, a small voice whispered that she was making a terrible mistake. Her younger sister, Lydia, had been less circumspect in her opinions. Lydia, who was only 15 and had not yet been subjected to the full force of their mother's matrimonial ambitions, had cornered Eleanor in the library one afternoon. "You cannot truly mean to marry him, Ellie," Lydia had said, using the childhood name that no one else was permitted. "He is dreadful. I saw him kick a dog at the Ashworth estate simply because it had the temerity to bark at him." Eleanor had felt a chill run down her spine, but she had forced herself to smile reassuringly at her sister. "You are young, Lydie. You do not understand the realities of our position." "I understand that you will be miserable," Lydia had retorted, her young face fierce with protective love. "And I understand that Mother cares more for the Thornbridge name than for your happiness." Eleanor had had no answer to that because it was true. The wedding was planned for early June to take place at the Grand Church near the Thornbridge estate in Yorkshire. Lady Margaret had thrown herself into the preparations with almost manic enthusiasm, selecting fabrics and flowers, negotiating with caterers and musicians, ensuring that every detail would reflect the importance of the match. Eleanor had been consulted on almost nothing, treated as little more than a mannequin to be dressed and displayed. As the day approached, Eleanor found herself withdrawing into an internal space where nothing could touch her. She moved through the required activities like an automaton, smiling when expected, nodding at appropriate moments, and feeling less and less like herself with each passing day. At night, she stood at her window and looked out at the stars, wondering if somewhere in the world there existed a life where a woman might choose her own path. But such thoughts were dangerous, and Eleanor had learned long ago to keep dangerous thoughts locked away where they could do no harm. She had learned to hide her true self beneath layers of compliance and propriety, just as she had learned to hide the scars that marked her back and shoulders, remnants of a childhood illness that had left her skin forever marked. No one knew about those scars. She had been careful, so careful, to ensure that no one ever saw them. They were her deepest shame, the physical manifestation of her imperfection in a world that demanded flawlessness from its women. On the eve of her wedding, Eleanor sat in her chamber and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was beautiful, perfectly groomed, and utterly empty. Tomorrow she would become Lady Thornbridge. Tomorrow her life as Eleanor Beaumont would effectively end. The thought should have filled her with anticipation, with excitement for the future. Instead, she felt only a vast and terrible emptiness, as though she was standing at the edge of an abyss. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the June sunshine streaming through the windows of Thornbridge Manor, where Eleanor and her family had stayed the night before the ceremony. The house was a monument to wealth and power, its rooms filled with priceless art and furniture, every surface polished to a gleaming perfection that seemed to reflect the cold grandeur of its master. Eleanor submitted to the ministrations of her maid and her mother with the detachment of someone preparing for execution rather than marriage. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of silk and lace designed to showcase her slender figure while maintaining perfect propriety. The high neckline ensured that no hint of the scars on her upper back would be visible. and Eleanor was grateful for that small mercy. Lady Margaret fussed and fluttered, adjusting veils and smoothing non-existent wrinkles, her face alight with triumph. This was her moment of victory, the culmination of years of careful planning. That her daughter looked pale and moved with the stiffness of barely suppressed panic seemed not to register with her at all. "You look perfect, my dear," Lady Margaret announced, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Sir Percival will be overcome when he sees you. This is the most important day of your life, Eleanor. Do remember to smile." The church was filled to capacity with the elite of English society, all come to witness the union of two prominent families. The pews were decorated with white roses and trailing ivy, and the scent of flowers was almost overwhelming. Eleanor walked down the aisle on her father's arm, seeing nothing but a blur of faces, hearing nothing but the pounding of her own heart. Sir Percival stood at the altar, resplendent in his wedding attire. He watched Eleanor approach with an expression of satisfaction, the look of a man who has successfully negotiated a favorable business transaction. When she reached his side, and her father placed her hand in his, Eleanor felt the familiar possessive grip, fingers closing around hers just a degree too tightly. The ceremony proceeded with stately dignity. The vicar intoned the traditional words, and Eleanor heard herself making the required responses in a voice that seemed to come from very far away. She was aware of the weight of expectation pressing down on her from all sides, the hundreds of eyes watching, judging, ensuring that she played her role perfectly. It was as the vicar was beginning the pronouncement that would seal their union that Eleanor noticed Sir Percival glancing toward the back of the church. There was something in his expression, a flash of uncertainty, perhaps even alarm. She turned slightly, following his gaze, and saw a young woman standing in the doorway. The woman was beautiful, dressed in a traveling costume that suggested she had come in haste, and her face was flushed with distress. The vicar faltered in his recitation as whispers began to ripple through the congregation. Sir Percival's hand tightened painfully around Eleanor's, and she saw his jaw clench with anger. The young woman took a step forward, and Eleanor realized with a shock that she recognized her. It was Charlotte Fairfax, Lydia's closest friend from school, a girl Eleanor had met several times during visits to the family. "Stop!" Charlotte called out, her voice carrying clearly through the church. "This wedding cannot proceed. Sir Percival, tell everyone what you promised me." The silence that followed was absolute and terrible. Eleanor felt the world tilting around her, felt Sir Percival's hand release hers as though she had suddenly become contaminated. She watched as colour flooded into his face and then drained away, leaving him ashen. "Charlotte, this is neither the time nor the place," Sir Percival said through gritted teeth, his voice low and dangerous. "Remove yourself at once." But Charlotte was not to be silenced. She moved down the aisle, her eyes blazing with betrayal and anger. "You promised to marry me, Percival. You promised after I gave you everything. And now I discover that you have been engaged to Miss Beaumont all along, that I was nothing more than a passing amusement to you." The gasps from the assembled guests rose like a wave. Eleanor felt as though she had been plunged into icy water, every nerve in her body screaming at once. She looked at Sir Percival, desperately hoping to see denial, outrage, anything that would refute Charlotte's claims. Instead, she saw guilt and fury warring on his face. "How dare you make such accusations?" Sir Percival hissed, but his words lacked conviction. "You are clearly distraught, Miss Fairfax. Your presence here is unseemly, and your claims are the product of a disturbed imagination." "Disturbed?" Charlotte laughed, a wild, broken sound. "You made me fall in love with you, Percival. You courted me in secret for 6 months. You spoke of our future together. And all the while, you were planning to marry her for her family's connections and her fortune, while keeping me as your mistress on the side." The church erupted into shocked exclamations and frantic whispers. Eleanor felt her knees weaken, felt the walls closing in around her. She was dimly aware of her mother's horrified expression, of her father moving toward them with anger darkening his features, of Lydia's face, white with shock and sympathy. "This is preposterous," Lady Margaret's voice rang out. "Sir Percival, I demand that you have this disturbed woman removed immediately. She is clearly attempting to sabotage this wedding out of jealousy or madness." But Sir Percival was not looking at Lady Margaret. He was staring at Charlotte with an expression that Eleanor recognized, for she had seen it before, turned upon servants and animals who had displeased him. It was contempt, pure and undiluted. "You were a diversion," Sir Percival said coldly, his voice carrying through the church. "Nothing more. If you chose to misinterpret kindness for something more, that is your own foolishness. I owe you nothing, Miss Fairfax, and I certainly will not allow you to destroy this union with your hysterical fantasies." Charlotte's face crumpled, and Eleanor felt a surge of compassion for the girl, even as her own world disintegrated. Before anyone could stop her, Charlotte pulled a packet of letters from her reticule and threw them at Sir Percival's feet. "Fantasies! Those are your letters, Percival. Your promises written in your own hand. Read them aloud if you dare, and let everyone see what kind of man you truly are." Eleanor bent automatically to retrieve one of the fallen letters. She recognized the handwriting immediately, the same precise script that had penned brief notes to her during their engagement. Her eyes scanned the page, taking in words of passion and promise that Sir Percival had never spoken to her. Her hands began to shake. Sir Percival snatched the letter from her grasp with a violence that made her flinch. "These prove nothing," he snarled. "The girl is clearly unbalanced. Eleanor, we will proceed with this ceremony. Vicar, continue." But Eleanor was no longer listening. A strange clarity had descended upon her, cutting through the shock and humiliation like a knife. She looked at Sir Percival, truly looked at him for perhaps the first time, and saw him clearly. She saw the cruelty in the set of his mouth, the calculation in his eyes, the absolute absence of any real feeling for her beyond her usefulness to him. And she realized that Charlotte Fairfax, whether her claims were entirely true or exaggerated, had given her an unexpected gift. She had shown Eleanor the truth before it was too late. "No," Eleanor heard herself say, the word emerging with surprising strength. Sir Percival turned to her, his expression darkening. "What did you say?" "I said no." Eleanor stepped back from him, her voice growing firmer with each word. "I will not marry you, Sir Percival. Not today, not ever." The gasps from the congregation were nothing compared to her mother's shriek of horror. "Eleanor, you cannot mean this. Think of the scandal. Think of our family's reputation." But Eleanor was thinking only of the future she had almost condemned herself to, the years of subjugation to a man who saw her as property, who had already proven himself capable of casual cruelty and heartless betrayal. She thought of Charlotte, weeping now in the aisle, and realized that she could have been standing in Charlotte's place, or worse, trapped in a marriage with no escape. "I am sorry, Mother," Eleanor said, and was surprised to find that she meant it. "But I cannot do this. I cannot pledge my life to a man who has shown himself to be devoid of honor or compassion. Whatever scandal follows, it cannot be worse than the misery I would endure as Lady Thornbridge." Sir Percival's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "You stupid, ungrateful girl," he hissed, all pretense of gentlemanly behavior abandoned. "Do you think anyone else will have you now? You have humiliated me in front of all society. I will ensure that you are ruined, that no respectable man will even look at you. You will die an old maid, scorned and forgotten." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, and for the first time in her life she felt no fear. "If that is the price of freedom from you, Sir Percival, then I will pay it gladly." She turned and walked back down the aisle, her head high despite the tears streaming down her face. Behind her she could hear her mother's wailing, Sir Percival's furious shouting, and the excited babble of gossip already beginning to spread. But she did not look back. She walked out of the church and into the bright June sunshine, feeling as though she had just escaped from prison. even as she knew that the consequences of her choice would be severe and long-lasting. Lydia caught up with her as she reached the carriage. Her sister threw her arms around Eleanor, holding her tightly. "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen," Lydia whispered fiercely. "I am so proud of you, Ellie." Eleanor held her sister and wept, not knowing whether her tears were of relief, terror, or grief for the life she had just destroyed. All she knew was that she had chosen herself, finally, after a lifetime of choosing duty. Whatever came next, it would be her choice to make. The days following the aborted wedding were a blur of recriminations and chaos. Lady Margaret had taken to her bed, declaring herself too ill from the shame to face society. Lord Beaumont, Eleanor's father, had been caught between fury at his daughter's defiance and a grudging respect for her courage. The servants whispered in corners, and the knocker had been removed from the front door of the London townhouse, a signal that the family was not receiving visitors. The scandal had spread through society with the speed and devastation of wildfire. The newspapers, always hungry for sensation, had seized upon the story with glee. Accounts of the disrupted wedding, embellished with each retelling, appeared in every drawing room. Eleanor was variously depicted as a heartless jilt, a poor innocent deceived, or a woman of questionable character herself. Sir Percival had launched a campaign of whispered insinuations, suggesting that Eleanor had known of his relationship with Charlotte and had used the revelation as an excuse to escape a marriage she had never wanted, thus impugning her honesty and honor. Charlotte Fairfax had disappeared, whisked away by her mortified family to some distant relation in Scotland, where it was hoped the scandal would not follow her. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy for the girl, who had been as much Sir Percival's victim as Eleanor herself. It was Eleanor's Aunt Agatha who provided the solution. Lady Agatha Pemberton was Lord Beaumont's elder sister, a widow who had lived in Bath for the past decade following the death of her husband. She had never had children of her own and had always maintained a somewhat detached but affectionate relationship with her brother's family. Unlike most of Eleanor's relatives, Aunt Agatha had never seemed particularly concerned with social position or the opinions of others. She dressed as she pleased, spoke her mind with remarkable frankness, and had cultivated a circle of friends that included artists, writers and scholars, alongside the more conventional members of Bath society. A week after the wedding debacle, Aunt Agatha arrived at the London townhouse unannounced and immediately took command of the situation with the efficiency of a general marshalling troops. "Stop your wailing, Margaret," she told her sister-in-law briskly. "The girl has shown excellent judgment in refusing to marry that odious man. Better a scandal now than a lifetime of misery. Eleanor, pack your things. You are coming to live with me in Bath." Lady Margaret had protested vehemently, but Aunt Agatha was immune to emotional manipulation. Within 2 days, Eleanor found herself on a coach heading west, her worldly possessions packed into trunks, leaving behind the only life she had ever known. Bath suited Eleanor immediately. The city, though smaller than London, possessed a genteel charm and a more relaxed social atmosphere. Aunt Agatha's house in the Royal Crescent was elegant without being ostentatious, filled with books and comfortable furniture that invited relaxation rather than rigid formality. For the first time in her life, Eleanor was encouraged to read what she pleased, to express her opinions freely, and to develop interests beyond needlework and watercolors. "You have been kept in a cage, my dear," Aunt Agatha told her one evening as they sat in the drawing room. "Not maliciously, perhaps, but caged nonetheless. Your mother meant well, I suppose, but she never understood that a woman needs more than a good marriage to be truly alive. Here you will have the opportunity to discover who Eleanor Beaumont actually is, rather than who society expects her to be." Under Aunt Agatha's guidance, Eleanor began to emerge from her shell. She accompanied her aunt to lectures at the assembly rooms, where scholars and intellectuals gathered to discuss philosophy, science, and social reform. She visited the pump room where Bath society congregated, but found herself more interested in conversations about new agricultural techniques and the expansion of railways than in gossip about who was courting whom. It was at one of these lectures, on the subject of advances in medical treatment, that Eleanor first encountered Dr. Elias Danforth. The Duke of Devonshire, as he was formerly known, was an unusual figure in Regency society. He had inherited his title at the age of 25, but rather than simply managing his estates and taking his place in Parliament as expected, he had shocked society by pursuing medical studies. He had trained in Edinburgh and London, and had established a reputation as a skilled physician with particular expertise in treating injuries and surgical cases. That such a man existed at all was remarkable. That he was young, handsome in an austere way, and possessed of a quiet intensity that commanded attention, made him the subject of considerable speculation and gossip. Some said he was running from scandal in his past. Others suggested he was mad, throwing away his position to dabble in medicine like a common tradesman. But no one could deny his brilliance or his dedication to his work. Eleanor first heard him speak at a lecture on modern surgical techniques. She had been hesitant to attend, knowing that the topic was considered unsuitable for ladies, but Aunt Agatha had waved away such concerns. "Nonsense," her aunt had said. "If the knowledge is valuable, it should be shared with anyone intelligent enough to understand it. Gender is irrelevant to the pursuit of learning." Dr. Danforth had spoken with precision and passion, describing new methods of treating wounds that significantly reduced infection and mortality. He used anatomical diagrams that caused several ladies in the audience to gasp and fan themselves. But Eleanor had found herself leaning forward, fascinated by the logical progression of his arguments and the obvious care he took with his patients. After the lecture, Aunt Agatha had maneuvered them into Dr. Danforth's path during the social gathering that followed. "Your Grace," Aunt Agatha had said with her characteristic directness, "my niece, Miss Eleanor Beaumont, was quite captivated by your presentation. She has an unusually keen intellect for someone who has been given nothing but the standard young lady's education. Perhaps you might recommend some reading materials that would further her understanding." Eleanor had felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment at her aunt's forwardness, but Dr. Danforth had regarded her with interest, rather than the condescension she had expected. "Miss Beaumont," he had said, his voice deep and measured, "I would be happy to recommend some texts, though I must warn you that they are quite technical. Do you have a background in the natural sciences?" "Very little, I'm afraid," Eleanor had admitted. "But I'm a quick learner, and I find the subject fascinating. The idea that we might reduce suffering through systematic study and application of knowledge seems to me one of the noblest pursuits possible." Something had shifted in Dr. Danforth's expression at her words. "That is precisely how I feel about it, Miss Beaumont. So many see medicine as merely a trade, but it is truly an art and a science combined, guided by compassion. I would be pleased to lend you some volumes from my own library, if Lady Pemberton does not object." Thus had begun an unlikely friendship. Dr. Danforth proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with Eleanor's questions and encouraging of her genuine interest in medical advances. He lent her books and papers, and on several occasions invited both Eleanor and her aunt to his clinic, where he treated patients who could not afford the fees of fashionable physicians. Eleanor found herself drawn to the work, moved by Dr. Danforth's dedication to helping those whom society had largely forgotten. She began to assist at the clinic, at first simply organizing supplies and keeping records, but gradually taking on more responsibility as Dr. Danforth recognized her steady nerves and practical competence. "You have a gift for this, Miss Beaumont," he told her one afternoon after they had successfully treated a child's badly broken arm. "You remain calm under pressure, and you seem to genuinely care about the patient's welfare. Those qualities are rarer than you might think, even among trained physicians." Eleanor had felt a warmth at his praise that was entirely different from the hollow satisfaction she had once taken in compliments, about her appearance or her accomplishments as a young lady. This was praise for something real, something useful. She was making a difference, however small, in the lives of people who desperately needed help. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor found herself thinking of Dr. Danforth more often than was probably proper. She admired his intelligence and his dedication, but more than that, she appreciated the way he treated her as an equal, never dismissing her opinions or suggesting that her interests were inappropriate for a woman. When they talked, which they did with increasing frequency, the conversations ranged across medicine, philosophy, politics, and literature. He challenged her ideas without belittling them and seemed genuinely interested in her perspectives. Aunt Agatha watched this developing friendship with knowing eyes, but said nothing beyond the occasional cryptic comment about how refreshing it was to see two intelligent people finding common ground. It was during one of their conversations at the clinic that Eleanor first began to open up about her past. They had been discussing the nature of healing, and Dr. Danforth had mentioned how some wounds, particularly those sustained in childhood, could leave lasting physical and emotional scars. "I understand that more than you might think," Eleanor had said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Dr. Danforth had paused in his work, his keen eyes studying her face. "I suspect you have a story, Miss Beaumont, though you need not share it if you prefer not to." And Eleanor, to her own surprise, had found herself telling him about the childhood illness that had left her scarred, about the shame she had carried for years, about the desperate attempts to hide her imperfection from the world. She did not tell him everything, not yet, but it was a beginning, a tentative step toward trust. Dr. Danforth had listened without judgment, his expression thoughtful. "Scars are not shameful, Miss Beaumont. They are evidence that we have lived, that we have survived. Any reasonable person would understand that." "But society is not always reasonable, Your Grace," Eleanor had replied, "particularly when it comes to young ladies. We are expected to be perfect, flawless. Any deviation from that standard renders us unmarketable." "Then society's standards are foolish," Dr. Danforth had said firmly. "True worth lies in character, intelligence, and kindness, not in unmarked skin. Any man who would reject a woman for such a trivial reason is not worthy of her in the first place." His words had stayed with Eleanor long after she returned to Aunt Agatha's house that evening. For the first time, she began to wonder whether there might be someone who could accept all of her, scars included, and whether Dr. Elias Danforth might be that person. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, and Eleanor found herself caught between hope and fear, uncertain how to proceed, but knowing that her life had changed irrevocably since coming to Bath. Winter had settled over Bath when Aunt Agatha announced that they would be attending the season's most anticipated event, the Duchess of Somerset's annual ball at her estate just outside the city. The Duchess, a formidable woman in her 60s with impeccable social connections, had been a girlhood friend of Aunt Agatha's and had remained loyal despite Aunt Agatha's unconventional lifestyle. "It is time, my dear, for you to re-enter society properly," Aunt Agatha told Eleanor over breakfast. "You have been in Bath for 6 months now. The scandal has died down, and there are new scandals to occupy the gossips. Moreover, you are no longer the timid girl who fled from that disastrous wedding. You have grown, Eleanor. You have discovered your own strength and your own interests. It is time to show society the woman you have become." Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect. The ball would be attended by the elite of Bath society and beyond. There was a strong possibility that people who had witnessed her humiliation in that church would be present. But she had indeed changed, and the thought of hiding forever held no appeal. "Will Dr. Danforth be attending?" Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. Aunt Agatha's eyes sparkled with amusement. "The Duke of Devonshire has been invited, yes. The Duchess is one of the few members of the nobility who appreciates his medical work rather than viewing it as an eccentricity. I imagine he will attend, though social gatherings are not his preferred environment." Eleanor found herself looking forward to the ball with an anticipation that surprised her. She had Aunt Agatha's modiste create a gown in deep sapphire silk, cut in the latest fashion, but with a high back that would conceal her scars. When she looked at herself in the mirror on the evening of the ball, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked confident, poised, and genuinely happy rather than merely playing a role. The Duchess of Somerset's estate was magnificent, ablaze with thousands of candles that turned the winter night into something magical. Eleanor entered on Aunt Agatha's arm, her head high, prepared to face whatever judgment awaited her. The reaction was not what she had expected. Yes, there were whispers and speculative glances, but there was also curiosity and a surprising amount of respect. The story of her dramatic escape from marriage to Sir Percival had been retold so many times that it had taken on almost legendary proportions. Some saw her as a romantic figure who had chosen love over duty, others as a principled woman who had refused to be bound to a dishonorable man. The truth was more complicated, but Eleanor was learning that truth and reputation rarely aligned perfectly. She was engaged in conversation with a group of ladies who were discussing the new lending library being established in Bath when she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to find Dr. Danforth, elegant in his evening attire, regarding her with an expression of undisguised admiration. "Miss Beaumont," he said, bowing over her hand, "you look extraordinarily well this evening. Bath obviously agrees with you." "Thank you, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. "I must say I did not expect to see you here. Aunt Agatha suggested that balls were not to your taste." "They are not generally," he admitted with a slight smile. "But I heard that a certain Miss Beaumont would be attending, and I found I could not stay away. I wonder if you might honor me with a dance." Eleanor had accepted, and as they moved together through a waltz, she felt a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. Dr. Danforth danced with the same precision he brought to his medical work, and their conversation flowed as easily as it did in the clinic or Aunt Agatha's drawing room. "I have been wanting to speak with you about something," Dr. Danforth said, as the music swirled around them. "I am expanding my practice. I have been offered the opportunity to establish a proper hospital in Bath, one that will treat patients regardless of their ability to pay. It is an enormous undertaking, but I believe it could make a real difference. However, I will need help managing such an enterprise. Miss Beaumont, I wondered if you might consider taking on a more formal role in this work. You have proven yourself invaluable at the clinic." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride and excitement. "I would be honored, Your Grace. Truly honored. The work we do at the clinic has given me more satisfaction than anything else I have ever done. To be part of something larger, something that could help so many people, would be a privilege." Dr. Danforth's expression softened. "You are remarkable, Miss Beaumont. You possess a rare combination of compassion and practical competence. I find myself constantly impressed by your dedication and your insight." Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion near the ballroom entrance drew their attention. The crowd was parting, and Eleanor felt her blood run cold as she saw who was making his way through the assembled guests. Sir Percival Thornbridge had arrived, accompanied by a young woman Eleanor did not recognize. The woman was beautiful in a hard, glittering way, and she clung to Sir Percival's arm with possessive triumph. Aunt Agatha materialized at Eleanor's side. "That is Lady Constance Hartley," she murmured, "a widow with a considerable fortune and very few scruples. It seems Sir Percival has found a new target for his ambitions, one who cares less about honor and more about maintaining her position in society. They became engaged last month, I understand." Eleanor felt Dr. Danforth's hand tighten slightly on her waist in a gesture of support. "Do you wish to leave?" he asked quietly. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I will not be driven away by him. I have done nothing wrong." Sir Percival had spotted her. His eyes narrowed, and he began making his way across the ballroom toward them with deliberate intent. The conversations around them died away as people sensed the approaching confrontation. "Miss Beaumont," Sir Percival said, with exaggerated courtesy that did not reach his cold eyes. "How unexpected to see you at such a gathering. I had heard you had retired from society in shame. Yet here you are, bold as brass, despite the scandal you caused." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Good evening, Sir Percival. I see you have recovered from your own difficulties. Please accept my congratulations on your engagement." Lady Constance simpered at Eleanor's side. "Thank you, Miss Beaumont. Percival has told me all about your unfortunate situation. Such a pity when a young woman allows nerves to overcome good sense. But I suppose not everyone is suited to the responsibilities of marriage to a man of station." The insult was clear, but Eleanor refused to rise to the bait. "Indeed, Lady Constance. It takes a certain kind of woman to appreciate Sir Percival's particular qualities. I hope you will find happiness together." The ambiguity in her statement was not lost on the assembled listeners. Several people smirked, and Eleanor saw Sir Percival's jaw clench with anger. "You ruined me," he hissed, dropping all pretense of civility. "Made me a laughingstock with your hysterical display. And for what? To waste your time playing at being a nurse in some squalid clinic. You have thrown away everything for nothing, and I am delighted to see it." "On the contrary," Dr. Danforth's voice cut through Sir Percival's vitriol like a blade. "Miss Beaumont has discovered something far more valuable than social position. She has found purpose and meaning. She is doing work that matters, helping people who desperately need assistance. That is worth more than any title or fortune, and certainly more than a miserable marriage to a man of questionable character." Sir Percival rounded on Dr. Danforth, his face flushing with rage. "And who are you to speak of character, Devonshire? You who have degraded your title by grubbing about with common people like a tradesman. You are as much a disgrace to your position as she is to hers." "Oh, I am a physician," Dr. Danforth said quietly, but with an authority that made Sir Percival step back. "I am also a duke, but my title is an accident of birth. My work is my choice, and I choose to use my skills and resources to alleviate suffering rather than simply maintaining my own comfort. If that makes me a disgrace in your eyes, Sir Percival, then I wear that judgment as a badge of honor." The crowd had swelled around them, everyone straining to hear the exchange. Eleanor felt a surge of affection and gratitude for Dr. Danforth's defense of both her and himself. She placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity and support. "Sir Percival," she said clearly, "I wish you and Lady Constance every happiness. As for myself, I have found something far more valuable than the life you were offering me. I have found independence, purpose, and the company of people who value me for who I am rather than what I represent. I would not trade that for anything." With that, she turned away from Sir Percival, effectively dismissing him. Dr. Danforth escorted her back into the crowd, and after a moment of stunned silence, the conversations resumed with even greater vigor. The scandal, it seemed, had just acquired a new and more interesting dimension. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself surrounded by people eager to speak with her. Some were merely curious, but others seemed genuinely interested in the work she was doing with Dr. Danforth. Several ladies expressed a desire to contribute to the new hospital project, either with donations or by offering their own time and skills. "It seems you have become something of a sensation," Aunt Agatha remarked with satisfaction. "Not as a scandal, but as someone worth knowing in your own right. I am very proud of you, my dear." Eleanor smiled, feeling a contentment that was entirely new. She looked across the ballroom to where Dr. Danforth was speaking with a group of potential donors for the hospital, his expression animated and engaged. Their eyes met across the distance, and he smiled at her, a smile of such warmth and understanding that Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. She was not the broken, humiliated girl who had fled from a church 6 months ago. She had become someone new, someone stronger and more authentic. and she was beginning to believe that happiness, real happiness, might be within her reach after all. Spring came to Bath with a flourish of blossoms and warm breezes that seemed to carry the promise of new beginnings. The months since the Duchess of Somerset's ball had been busy ones for Eleanor. The hospital project had moved forward with surprising speed, thanks in large part to Dr. Danforth's tireless efforts and the generous contributions from members of society who had been moved by the vision of providing quality medical care to all who needed it. Eleanor had taken on increasing responsibility in planning the hospital's operations. She worked with Dr. Danforth to develop protocols for patient care, organized the training of nurses and assistants, and managed the complex logistics of supplies and staffing. The work was demanding and occasionally exhausting, but it filled her with a sense of purpose that she had never imagined possible. Her relationship with Dr. Danforth had deepened into something that neither of them spoke of directly, but which was evident to everyone who saw them together. They spent long hours working side by side, their conversations ranging from medical matters to philosophy, literature, and personal history. Dr. Danforth had shared with Eleanor the story of his own unconventional path, how the death of his younger brother from a preventable illness had driven him to pursue medicine despite the scandal it caused in his family. I realized that I could either spend my life maintaining appearances and contributing nothing of real value, or I could use my position and resources to make a genuine difference, he had told her one evening as they reviewed plans for the hospital's surgical ward. It was not a difficult choice, though it cost me the approval of many in my circle, but I have never regretted it. Eleanor had understood completely. She had made a similar choice, though hers had been born of desperation rather than purposeful decision. The result, however, was the same. A life that felt authentic and meaningful rather than merely decorative. It was on a particularly fine April morning that Dr. Danforth arrived at Aunt Agatha's house with an unusual degree of formality. He requested a private audience with Eleanor in the drawing room, and when Aunt Agatha raised her eyebrows meaningfully, Eleanor felt her heart begin to race. "Miss Beaumont," Dr. Danforth began, then paused and started again. "Eleanor, if I may be so bold as to use your given name, these past months have been among the happiest of my life. Working with you, coming to know you, has shown me what a true partnership can be. You are not only intelligent and capable, but compassionate and brave. You have overcome scandal and hardship with remarkable grace, and you have dedicated yourself to work that many in your position would consider beneath them." Eleanor felt tears prickling at her eyes as she realized where his words were leading. "I know that you have reasons to be wary of marriage," Dr. Danforth continued, moving closer to her. "I know that your previous experience was painful and humiliating, but I hope that you can see that not all men are like Sir Percival Thornbridge. I hope that you might consider a different kind of union, one based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine affection." He took her hands in his touch gentle and sure. "Eleanor, I am asking you to marry me, not because I need an ornament or a hostess, but because I cannot imagine continuing this work or my life without you by my side. I am offering you partnership, not ownership, freedom, not restriction. And if you will have me, I promise to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of your trust." Eleanor felt a sob catch in her throat. The contrast between this proposal and the cold transaction of her engagement to Sir Percival could not have been more stark. Dr. Danforth was offering her everything she had never dared to hope for: respect, partnership, and the freedom to continue the work that had given her life meaning. "Elias," she said, using his given name for the first time, "I accept. With all my heart, I accept." He pulled her into his arms, and Eleanor felt a happiness so profound it was almost painful. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise rather than a claim. The news of their engagement spread through Bath society with gratifying speed. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with most people viewing it as a romantic triumph, the scorned lady finding true love with the noble physician. Even Eleanor's parents, who had maintained a frosty distance since the aborted wedding to Sir Percival, sent a cautious letter of congratulations. Lady Margaret, Eleanor suspected, was simply relieved that her daughter would be married after all, and to a duke no less, even if he was an eccentric one. The wedding was planned for late spring, to be held in Bath Abbey with only close friends and family in attendance. Eleanor had no desire for a grand spectacle this time. She wanted only a meaningful ceremony that would mark the beginning of her new life with Elias. There was, however, one matter that weighed heavily on Eleanor's mind as the wedding approached. She had not yet told Elias the full extent of her scars, had not shown him the physical marks of her childhood illness. He knew they existed, knew they were a source of shame for her, but he had never pressed her to reveal them. As their wedding night drew closer, Eleanor knew she would have to trust him with this final secret. The thought terrified her. What if, when he saw the full reality of her scarred skin, he felt disgust or disappointment? What if the knowledge changed how he saw her? She tried to tell herself that he was a physician, that he had seen far worse injuries, that he had told her scars were nothing to be ashamed of. But the old fears, ingrained by years of her mother's obsession with physical perfection, were not so easily dismissed. It was Aunt Agatha, perceptive as always, who noticed Eleanor's growing anxiety as the wedding approached. "You are worried about something, my dear," Aunt Agatha said one evening as they sat together in the drawing room. "I can always tell. Is it the wedding itself or something else?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided that she needed to speak to someone about her fears. She told her aunt about the scars, about her shame, about her terror that Elias might reject her when he saw them. Aunt Agatha listened without interruption, then took Eleanor's hands in her own. "My dear girl, Dr. Danforth, Elias loves you. Not the idea of you, not your appearance, but you, the woman you are, intelligent, compassionate, brave, and dedicated. He has seen you at your best and in moments of difficulty. He knows your character. Do you truly believe that some marks on your skin, evidence of an illness you survived as a child, would change his feelings?" "I am afraid," Eleanor admitted in a small voice. "I know it is irrational, but I cannot help it." "Fear is not always rational," Aunt Agatha said gently. "But courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite fear. You have shown such courage already, Eleanor. Breaking that engagement, starting a new life, dedicating yourself to difficult work. Trust yourself now to take this final step. Trust him. He has earned that trust, I think." Eleanor nodded, knowing her aunt was right, but still feeling the weight of her anxiety. As the wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, she tried to push her fears aside and focus on the joy of the moment. The ceremony in Bath Abbey was simple and moving. Elias looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, and when they spoke their vows, Eleanor felt the truth of every word. This was what marriage should be, a partnership of equals, a union based on love and respect. The wedding breakfast was held at Aunt Agatha's house, intimate and joyful. Eleanor's parents attended, along with Lydia, who had been Eleanor's sole attendant. Dr. Danforth's closest colleagues from his medical work were also present, and the conversation ranged widely and enthusiastically across topics that would have made Lady Margaret faint with horror. As evening approached, Elias and Eleanor departed for Devonshire House, the Duke's Bath residence, where they would spend their first days as a married couple before travelling to his primary estate in Derbyshire. The house was elegant but comfortable, and Eleanor could already envision herself being happy there. As they entered the master bedchamber, Eleanor felt her anxiety return with overwhelming force. The room was beautiful, lit by candlelight that cast dancing shadows across the walls. Elias turned to her, his expression tender. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you are trembling. Please tell me what troubles you." And so, with shaking voice, Eleanor told him everything. She told him about the fever that had ravaged her as a child, about the physician who had applied treatments that had scarred her skin, about years of hiding and shame, about her mother's horror at the marks that made her daughter less than perfect. Elias listened intently, his expression growing increasingly sorrowful. "Oh, my darling," he said when she had finished. "What you describe sounds like blistering agents, likely applied in an attempt to draw out fever. It was a common treatment at the time, but we now know it does more harm than good. You suffered through a terrible illness and then through a misguided treatment, and you have carried shame for something that was never your fault." He moved closer to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "May I see them?" he asked quietly. "Not because I doubt your word or because it matters to my feelings for you, but because I am a physician and I want to understand what you endured." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She turned away from him and with shaking hands began to unfasten her gown. Elias helped her, his touch respectful and careful. As the silk slipped from her shoulders and down her arms, exposing her back to the candlelight, Eleanor closed her eyes, unable to watch his face. She heard his sharp intake of breath and felt her heart sink. But then his hands, warm and gentle, touched her back, tracing the patterns of silvered scars that ran across her shoulders and upper back. His touch was clinical at first, the physician assessing an old injury, but then it became something more, tender, almost reverent. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "look at me, please." She turned slowly, expecting to see disgust or pity in his face. Instead, she saw tears in his eyes and an expression of such love and anger that it took her breath away. "You survived this," he said intently. "You were a child, suffering through fever and pain, and you survived. These scars are proof of your strength, Eleanor. They are nothing to be ashamed of. They are part of you, part of your history, and I love every single one of them because they are part of the woman you have become." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Eleanor felt something break inside her, some tight knot of shame and fear that she had carried for so long. She wept against his chest, tears of relief and release, while he held her and murmured words of love and reassurance. When her tears had subsided, Elias cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a passion that left no doubt about his desire for her. The wedding night that followed was everything Eleanor had hoped for, and nothing like she had feared. Elias was gentle and patient, treating her with a reverence that made her feel cherished rather than owned. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt completely accepted, scars and all, by someone who truly saw her. As they lay together afterward, Eleanor traced patterns on Elias's chest, feeling a contentment she had never imagined possible. "I was so afraid," she admitted quietly. "I thought you might be repulsed." "Never," Elias said firmly, tightening his arm around her. "You are beautiful, Eleanor, not despite your scars, but as you are, complete and whole. I meant what I said in my vows. I will spend my life proving to you that you are valued, loved, and respected. This, what we have together, is what marriage should be. Partnership, trust, love." Eleanor smiled into the darkness, feeling as though she had finally come home. The path to this moment had been difficult, marked by humiliation and fear and uncertainty. But it had led her here, to a marriage that was everything she had never dared to dream of. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Beaumont Danforth was truly, completely happy. A year had passed since Eleanor's wedding to Elias, and the transformation in her life continued to unfold in ways that brought her constant joy and satisfaction. They had divided their time between Elias's estate in Derbyshire, a beautiful property with extensive grounds, and a manor house that dated back to the 16th century, and Bath, where the hospital project had finally come to fruition. The Danforth Hospital had opened its doors 6 months after the wedding, and it had already established itself as a revolutionary institution. Unlike the old-style infirmaries that treated the poor as charity cases deserving of minimal care, the Danforth Hospital provided the same quality of treatment to all patients, regardless of their ability to pay. Elias had recruited some of the finest physicians and surgeons in England, and together they were pioneering new techniques and approaches to medical care. Eleanor had found her calling in hospital administration and patient advocacy. She had developed programs to train young women in nursing skills, creating opportunities for employment that offered dignity and purpose. She had also established a system for follow-up care, ensuring that patients who left the hospital continued to receive the support they needed to recover fully. Her work was challenging and often emotionally demanding, but it gave her a sense of accomplishment that she had never experienced in her previous life. The social reaction to the hospital had been mixed. Many in society applauded the charitable work and contributed generously to its support. Others, particularly those of the older generation, viewed it as an unseemly enterprise for a duke and duchess to be involved in. Eleanor and Elias cared little for such opinions. They had each other, they had work that mattered, and they had built a life together that was rich in meaning if unconventional in form. Their marriage had deepened and matured with the passing months. Eleanor had shed the last vestiges of her old shame and anxiety, bolstered by Elias's consistent love and acceptance. He had been true to his word, treating her as a partner in every sense. They discussed hospital business together, made decisions jointly about their properties and investments, and supported each other through the inevitable challenges that arose. Their physical relationship had also blossomed, moving from tentative exploration to passionate intimacy as Eleanor learned to trust completely, and Elias revealed the depths of his own capacity for love. They had recently learned that Eleanor was with child, news that had filled them both with joyful anticipation. Eleanor had been slightly nervous about how pregnancy and motherhood would affect her work at the hospital, but Elias had immediately assured her that they would find a way to balance all of their responsibilities. "We will manage it together," he had told her, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Just as we manage everything else. Our child will grow up seeing both parents engaged in meaningful work, contributing to society in practical ways. What better example could we provide?" It was on a crisp autumn morning that Eleanor received unexpected news from Bath. Aunt Agatha had written to inform her that Sir Percival Thornbridge's marriage to Lady Constance had ended in spectacular scandal. It seemed that Lady Constance, who had married Sir Percival primarily for his title and social position, had discovered that his debts were far more extensive than he had disclosed. Moreover, she had caught him in a compromising position with her own lady's maid. The ensuing confrontation had been public and vicious, resulting in a legal separation that was being discussed in every drawing room in England. "I cannot say I am surprised," Eleanor remarked to Elias as they walked through the grounds of their Derbyshire estate. "Sir Percival never valued fidelity or honesty. I suspect Lady Constance is discovering that titles and charm mean little when character is lacking." "Do you ever regret the life you might have had?" Elias asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The social position, the grand estates, the place at the pinnacle of society that would have been yours as Lady Thornbridge." Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face her husband, taking both of his hands in hers. "I regret nothing," she said firmly. "That life would have been a gilded cage, beautiful on the surface, but empty of all real meaning. What we have together, what we have built, is worth more than any amount of social position or material wealth. I am doing work that matters. I'm married to a man who respects and loves me. I'm expecting a child who will grow up in a household that values compassion, intelligence, and purpose over superficial appearances. I would not trade this life for anything." Elias smiled and pulled her close, kissing her gently. "You are remarkable, do you know that? When I first met you, you were like a bird with clipped wings, desperate to fly but convinced you could not. Now look at you. You soar, Eleanor. You inspire everyone around you to be better, to do more, to care more deeply." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at his words. She thought back to the terrified girl who had stood in that church and made the hardest decision of her life. She thought of the journey that had brought her from that moment to this one, from humiliation and shame to purpose and love. It had not been an easy path, but it had been hers, chosen freely rather than imposed upon her. They returned to Bath the following week for the opening of a new wing at the hospital, funded by donations that had poured in from across England. The ceremony was well attended, and Eleanor was gratified to see how many people had come to support the work they were doing. She spoke briefly to the assembled crowd about the hospital's mission and the lives that had already been saved or improved through the care provided there. As she stood beside Elias, accepting congratulations and discussing future plans with donors and supporters, Eleanor caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Charlotte Fairfax, the young woman whose dramatic revelation had precipitated Eleanor's escape from her engagement, was standing near the back of the room. She looked older, more subdued, but there was a quiet dignity in her bearing that had not been there before. During a lull in the festivities, Eleanor made her way to Charlotte's side. The young woman looked startled and slightly apprehensive at Eleanor's approach. "Miss Fairfax," Eleanor said gently, "I am so pleased to see you here. How are you?" Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "Your Grace, I never had the opportunity to apologize for the terrible scene I caused at your wedding. I was desperate and foolish, and I made everything so much worse for you." Eleanor took Charlotte's hand and squeezed it firmly. "You did me the greatest favor anyone has ever done me," she said with complete sincerity. "If not for you, I would have married Sir Percival, and my life would have been miserable. You showed me the truth about him before it was too late. For that, I will always be grateful." Charlotte's expression shifted from apprehension to wonder. I had not thought of it that way. I felt such shame for my own foolishness in believing his lies." "We were both deceived," Eleanor said firmly, "but we both survived, and we both moved forward. Tell me, what are you doing now?" Charlotte explained that after the scandal, she had gone to live with an aunt in Scotland. There, away from the judgment of English society, she had begun to recover her sense of self. She had discovered a talent for painting and had been studying with a local artist. She had come to Bath to visit friends and had heard about the hospital's opening. "I wanted to see what you had accomplished," Charlotte admitted. "I heard stories about how you had transformed your life, about the work you were doing. It gave me hope that I too might find a new path." Eleanor felt a surge of warmth toward the young woman. "You will, Charlotte. I am certain of it. And if you are interested in remaining in Bath, we are always in need of talented people at the hospital. Your artistic skills might be valuable in our efforts to document medical procedures and anatomy for teaching purposes." Charlotte's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. "Would you truly consider employing me after everything?" "After everything, I consider you a friend," Eleanor said simply. "We were both victims of the same man's cruelty, and we both emerged stronger. Let us help each other continue to grow." As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor reflected on the strange paths that had led her to this moment. She had begun as a frightened, controlled young woman with no agency over her own life. She had been humiliated and scorned, forced to flee from a wedding that was supposed to be the pinnacle of her success, but that humiliation had led to freedom. That shame had led to self-discovery. And that desperate escape had led her to a life richer and more meaningful than anything she could have imagined in her old existence. That evening, as she and Elias returned to their Bath residence, Eleanor stood at the window of their bedchamber and looked out over the city. Elias came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his hand resting gently on the slight swell of her pregnancy. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice warm against her ear. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Eleanor said softly, "how the things we fear most can sometimes lead us to the greatest happiness. I was so afraid of scandal, so terrified of judgment and rejection. When I walked out of that church, I thought my life was over. I thought I had destroyed any chance of happiness or respectability. And instead, you found something better, Elias said. I found truth, Eleanor replied. I found purpose. I found love. I found myself. And I learned that the scars we carry, whether visible or not, are not things to hide or be ashamed of. They are evidence of our survival, proof that we are strong enough to endure and grow. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. I never thanked you properly for that night, our wedding night, when you saw my scars and responded with such love and acceptance. You freed me from years of shame with your understanding. You gave me permission to be whole, imperfect, and still worthy of love. Elias cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. You were always worthy, Eleanor. You just needed to see it yourself. And I am honored every day to be the man who gets to love you, support you, and build a life with you. This, what we have, is what I always hoped marriage could be. Equal partners, working together, loving each other not despite our flaws, but as complete human beings. Eleanor kissed him then, pouring into that kiss all of her love, gratitude, and joy. When they finally parted, both were smiling, their foreheads pressed together, in a moment of perfect understanding and connection. We should write to Lydia, Eleanor said, thinking of her sister who was now preparing for her own debut in society. I want to tell her that she should never settle for anything less than what we have found, that no amount of social pressure or family expectation is worth sacrificing one's true self and one's chance at genuine happiness. We will write to her together, Elias agreed, and perhaps our story, unconventional as it is, will help others find the courage to choose their own paths as well. As they settled in for the evening, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. The girl who had been defined by others' expectations, who had hidden her scars and her true self beneath layers of propriety, was gone. In her place was a woman who had chosen her own destiny, who had found meaningful work and true partnership, and who would raise her child to value authenticity over appearance, compassion over conformity, and love over duty. The Duke had indeed stopped cold when he saw the scars she had hidden for so long. But his reaction had not been the horror or rejection she had feared. It had been love, acceptance, and a recognition that those marks were part of the story that had shaped her into the extraordinary woman she had become. And in that moment, Eleanor had finally bloomed, transforming from a carefully cultivated ornamental flower into something wild, resilient, and gloriously free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed following Eleanor and Elias's journey from shame to acceptance, from duty to purpose, and from fear to love, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotionally compelling historical dramas. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What moment in Eleanor's story resonated with you the most? Have you ever had to choose between societal expectations and your own happiness? Share your experiences and let's continue this conversation together. Until next time, remember that your scars, whether visible or hidden, are proof of your strength and survival. Embrace them and bloom wherever you are planted.